5 bikers suddenly approached Henry, a 91-year-old veteran, as he was strolling to the diner. They harassed him and made fun of him, refusing to let him go. However, when he made a phone call, they turned pale. It was a quiet evening, the kind that made Henry feel at peace. The 91-year-old veteran limped down the street, his trusty crutch clicking softly against the pavement. The cool breeze whispered through the trees, and the faint glow of streetlights bathed the town in a serene light. Henry had lived a long life, filled with moments of bravery and sacrifice, and now he cherished these simple pleasures. But tonight was different. The calm would soon be shattered. As Henry approached the local diner, a familiar destination where he often enjoyed a warm meal and pleasant company, the sound of revving engines cut through the tranquility. His heart skipped a beat as he turned to see 5 motorcycles speeding towards him. The riders, young and reckless, wore leather jackets and grins. They were led by Chuck, a tall, imposing figure with a menacing air. The bikers surrounded Henry, their engines roaring loudly. The noise was deafening, and Henry had to cover his ears. They circled him like vultures, taunting him with cruel laughter. "Look at the old man," Chuck jeered. "What's a cripple like you doing out here? Got no money, just begging for scraps?" Henry's grip tightened on his crutch, a wave of anger bubbling up inside him. But he knew better than to react. Years of military discipline had taught him patience and composure, even in the face of adversity. He kept his eyes steady, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. One of the bikers suddenly veered closer, knocking Henry's crutch out from under him. He stumbled and fell, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through his body, but he fought back a groan. As he reached for his crutch, another biker kicked it away. "Crawl for it, old man," he sneered, leaning against his bike with a smug look. Henry lay on the ground, the cold seeping into his bones. He felt a mix of humiliation and anger, but he swallowed it down. With gritted teeth, he began to crawl towards his crutch. The bikers laughed, mocking his struggle. They called him a beggar, a burden, an old man with no one who cared about him. Their words were knives cutting deep, but Henry remained silent. He knew reacting would only encourage them. One of the bikers, with a sneer, asked, "Where do you think you're going, old man?" Henry, now holding his crutch and pulling himself up with some difficulty, met their eyes with a steady gaze. "I'm not a beggar," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm going to the diner to have a meal like anyone else." The bikers burst into laughter, louder and more derisive. Chuck shook his head, still grinning. "Oh, so how do you plan to pay for that meal, huh? Gonna beg or cry?" Henry didn't respond. He knew these men were looking for a reaction, hoping to break him. But he wouldn't give them that satisfaction. He adjusted his crutch and started walking again, heading towards the diner. The bikers followed closely, their bikes roaring beside him. They kept taunting him, but Henry tuned them out, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. As they neared the diner, the bikers' antics only grew bolder. They continued to harass Henry, making rude comments and blocking his path. Despite the growing irritation, Henry kept his composure. He knew this would end soon, one way or another. Upon reaching the diner, the bikers parked their bikes and followed Henry inside. They watched as he made his way to a table and sat down, carefully leaning his crutch against the wall. The waitress, a young woman with a kind face, approached nervously, glancing at the bikers with apprehension. Henry ordered his usual meal, speaking calmly despite the tense atmosphere. The bikers, gathered around him, listened intently. Every word he said seemed to fuel their mockery, their voices growing louder and more obnoxious. They disturbed the other customers, who glanced nervously in their direction, fearing what might happen next. If anyone dared to complain, Chuck and his gang quickly threatened them, telling them to mind their own business if they didn't want trouble. Chuck and his gang were a nuisance, and it was clear they were enjoying every moment of it. Henry, usually a patient man, felt his irritation growing. It had been a long time since anyone had managed to get under his skin like this. The last time he felt this was during his days in the army, when he had to deal with the relentless training and discipline. But even then, there was a purpose, a sense of duty. Here, it was just senseless cruelty. As the waitress brought Henry's meal to the table, the bikers closed in. Chuck, with a smirk, reached out and grabbed the plate from the waiter's hands. He held it just out of Henry's reach, a mocking grin plastered on his face. "You want this, old man? Then you better order something for us too," he taunted. The waitress tried to intervene, her voice shaky but firm. "Please just let him have his meal. He hasn't done anything to you." Without warning, Chuck's expression darkened, and in a sudden act of aggression he threw the plate to the ground. The crash of breaking ceramic echoed through the diner, silencing the room. The mocking grin was replaced by a cold sneer as he looked at Henry and the startled waitress. The air was thick with tension, and Chuck's actions left no doubt that he and his gang were here to assert dominance. Chuck turned to her, his expression darkening. He pushed her away with his free hand, causing her to stumble. "Mind your business, or we'll burn this place down," he threatened, his voice cold and menacing. The first biker, a scruffy-looking man with a cigarette dangling from his lips, walked over to Henry's table. Without a word, he took a drag from his cigarette and then snuffed it out in Henry's apple pie. The sight of the smouldering cigarette in the dessert made Henry's stomach churn with disgust. The biker grinned, clearly pleased with himself. Next, the second biker, a lanky figure with a greasy smile, leaned over and spit into Henry's coffee. The sight and sound of it made Henry clench his fists in silent rage. The biker chuckled, finding amusement in his cruel act. "Guess you won't be needing this," he said mockingly. Henry sat there, his jaw clenched, trying to maintain his composure. The biker's actions were not just disrespectful, they were dehumanizing. He had endured much in his life, but this blatant disregard for his dignity was infuriating. The other customers watched in horror, too afraid to intervene. Just as Henry was about to speak, the waitress stepped forward again. Her face was pale but determined. "That's enough," she said, her voice steady. "Leave him alone, or I'll call the police." Her courage was admirable, but it was also dangerous. One of the bikers, clearly angered by her defiance, stepped forward and slapped her across the face. The sound of the slap was sharp, and the waitress staggered, clutching her cheek in shock. The diner fell into a stunned silence, the air thick with tension. The diner fell into a stunned silence, the air thick with tension. Henry's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the waitress recover from the slap, her eyes wide with shock. He couldn't believe what had just happened, and the sight of her trembling made his blood boil. This couldn't go on any longer. He quickly approached her, concern etched on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, though her voice wavered as she spoke. "I'm fine, just shocked." Henry gave her a reassuring nod and said, "Thank you for standing up for me, but I'll handle this from here." The bikers snickered, circling around them with mocking smiles. Chuck, ever the ringleader, sneered, "Handle it? How? You can barely stand." The rest of the gang laughed, confident in their numbers and their presumed control over the situation. Henry, ignoring their derision, turned back to the waitress. "Can you do me a favor?" he asked gently. "Take their orders. Make sure they get exactly what they want." The waitress hesitated, wiping a tear from her cheek, but then nodded resolutely. She took out her notepad and pen, going from one biker to the next, writing down their demands. The gang jeered and made exaggerated orders, clearly enjoying the power they held. As the waitress went to the kitchen, Chuck leaned in, chuckling. "You're a real comedian, old man. You think this is going to end well for you?" The bikers continued to mock and taunt, convinced that Henry was powerless against them. When the food arrived, the bikers dug in with enthusiasm, eating noisily and without manners. They smirked at Henry, who sat quietly, watching them with a calm expression. He seemed unperturbed by the chaos around him, a serene presence amidst the storm of their boisterous behavior. Slowly, Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The bikers paused, curious but not concerned. "What, calling the cops now?" One of them scoffed. Another laughed. "They won't do a thing. We've got our own crew, and they know better than to mess with us." Henry remained silent, dialing a number and holding the phone to his ear. His expression was inscrutable as he spoke briefly into the phone, too softly for anyone else to hear. The bikers watched with growing curiosity, still unconvinced that Henry could pose any real threat. Chuck leaned in closer, trying to catch a glimpse of the phone screen. His smirk faltered and then disappeared entirely as he saw the name displayed. His face paled, and he instinctively took a step back. The other bikers, noticing his reaction, crowded around to see what had shaken their leader. They too went pale as they read the name on the screen. Henry held the phone to his ear, his voice calm and steady. In a familiar, friendly tone, he said, "Hey, comrade, can you come over to the diner on Main Street? Henry's in a bit of a situation and could use a friend." He paused, listening for a moment, then nodded. "Thanks. See you soon." With that, he ended the call and set the phone down on the table. His expression relaxed as he waited. The atmosphere in the diner shifted dramatically. The bikers, who had been so confident and carefree moments ago, now stood uneasy and silent. They exchanged worried glances, suddenly questioning the wisdom of their actions. The realization that they had underestimated Henry hit them hard, and the smug arrogance they had displayed quickly evaporated. A few minutes after Henry's call, a sleek black car pulled up abruptly in front of the diner. The headlights cut through the dim evening, and a tall, distinguished man stepped out. His silver hair gleamed under the streetlights, and his tailored suit spoke of authority and strength. There was an undeniable air of power around him, a presence that commanded respect. From inside the diner, Henry and the bikers watched through the large windows. Henry smiled warmly and waved, but the bikers stiffened, exchanging nervous glances. Chuck, who had been so confident moments ago, now stared at the man, his throat tightening as he swallowed hard. The man returned Henry's smile with a brief nod before his face hardened as he turned his gaze to the bikers. The shift in his demeanor was immediate and intimidating. The once pleasant smile vanished, replaced by a cold, stern expression. His eyes were sharp, assessing the scene before him with a keen intensity. He walked briskly into the diner, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. As he entered, the bikers stood up hastily, heads bowed in respect. Chuck and his friends looked visibly anxious. Their earlier bravado completely evaporated. The man's presence alone was enough to cow them into submission. "Good evening, Henry," the man greeted, his voice deep and respectful. He then turned to the bikers, his expression darkening. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice was low, carrying a weight that made the air around them thick with tension. Chuck looked down, avoiding the man's piercing gaze. "Sir, we—" "Quiet!" the man snapped, cutting him off. The authority in his voice was undeniable. He took a step closer to Chuck, his eyes blazing with anger. I brought you into this gang, Chuck, to stand for something, not to terrorize innocent people, and certainly not to harass a veteran of all people. The other bikers flinched, their eyes darting between Chuck and the man. They knew who he was, an elder statesman of the gang, a man whose word was law. His disappointment was a heavy blow, and they could feel the weight of their actions pressing down on them. The man continued, his voice cold and precise. Do you think this is what we stand for? That we use our strength to bully the weak, to disrespect those who have served? He gestured towards Henry. This man saved my life in the war. He lost his leg saving me, and here you are, making a mockery of his sacrifice. He leaned in closer to Chuck, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Your own leader is a veteran. Why don't you go and disrespect him too, if you think you're so tough? The question hung in the air, a challenge that Chuck and his friends dared not answer. The man straightened, his gaze sweeping over the bikers with disdain. You disgrace the name of our gang. By messing with Henry, you've messed with me. This man's kindness and bravery are the reasons I'm standing here today. You owe him your respect, and you've failed to give it. At his words, Chuck and the other bikers immediately dropped to their knees. We're sorry, sir, Chuck stammered, his voice shaking. The rest of the gang echoed his apology, their heads bowed low. The display of submission was complete, a stark contrast to the arrogance they had displayed earlier. The man nodded, satisfied with their display of contrition. Apologize to him, he ordered, nodding towards Henry. The bikers turned to Henry, their voices choked with remorse as they mumbled their apologies. We're sorry, Mr. Henry. We didn't mean any harm, Chuck said, his voice barely a whisper. Henry felt a mix of emotions as he looked down at the 5 men kneeling before him. Their earlier arrogance had crumbled, replaced by a genuine fear and regret. Chuck's apology hung in the air, and the sincerity in his voice was palpable. Henry hesitated for a moment, still processing the unexpected turn of events. It's all right, he finally said, his voice gentle. I forgive you. As Henry spoke, he gestured for the men to stand, but the gang leader quickly intervened. No, they stay on their knees, he commanded, his tone firm and unyielding. He glanced around the diner, his eyes narrowing as he took in the mess his men had made. Plates shattered, food spoiled, an embarrassing display of disrespect. The gang leader turned back to Henry, his expression serious. They need to learn the consequences of their actions. Let them stay where they are. He spoke with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. His gaze swept over the kneeling men, and they shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny. With a nod, the gang leader continued, I've already called the mayor. These men will answer to him for what they've done. They need a lesson in respect, and they'll get it. His voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of resolve. Henry, sensing the gravity of the situation, felt a pang of guilt. But as much as he empathized with the bikers, he knew the gang leader was right. They needed to face the consequences of their behavior. The waitress, still shaken but composed, began to clear away the mess. The gang leader gestured to her and said, Please, bring Mr. Henry a fresh meal. On me. The waitress nodded and quickly set about her task, clearing the soiled plates and bringing out new ones. As they waited for the food, Henry and the gang leader reminisced about their past. A fond smile crossed Henry's face. He looked directly at the leader and said, It's been too long, Marcus. Never thought I'd see you like this, still looking out for the little guy. Marcus chuckled, the tension in his features easing slightly. Yeah, well, some things never change. he replied, a hint of warmth in his voice. We were just kids back then, weren't we? Henry nodded, his eyes twinkling with the memory. Feels like a lifetime ago. You remember that night in the trenches? Couldn't have made it out without you. He patted Marcus on the shoulder, their camaraderie evident in the easy banter and shared glances. His eyes twinkled with the memory, despite the dark context. The gang leader smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through his stern exterior. How could I forget? You pulled me out of there when everyone else had given up. Lost your leg in the process. Henry shrugged, a modest gesture that belied the gravity of the sacrifice. Just did what anyone else would have done, he said, though both men knew the truth, that few had the courage or the heart to do what Henry did. The conversation flowed easily, filled with shared stories of their time in the service. They laughed at the antics of their younger selves, a moment of levity amidst the serious circumstances. Marcus glanced at Henry's prosthetic leg, a thoughtful expression on his face. How's the leg treating you? He asked, his tone casual but laced with concern. Henry tapped the prosthetic lightly, smiling. It's holding up. Got used to it over the years. Their conversation continued, filled with mutual respect and camaraderie. The bikers, still kneeling, listened in silence, their earlier bravado completely gone. It was clear to them that Henry and the gang leader shared a bond that went beyond mere friendship, a bond forged in the crucible of war and tempered by years of shared experiences. The waitress returned with a fresh meal for Henry, setting it down gently on the table. Marcus nodded his thanks, then took a seat across from his old friend. As Henry picked up his fork, the door to the diner opened once more. This time it was the mayor, looking concerned and slightly breathless. He approached Henry with a warm, yet apologetic smile. Henry, I'm so sorry about all of this, the mayor began, his voice filled with genuine remorse. You deserve better than to be treated like that. He shook Henry's hand firmly, a gesture of respect and solidarity. Henry, ever the composed figure, nodded in acknowledgement. It's all right, Tom. Things happen, he replied, his tone forgiving. But the mayor seemed unconvinced, his brow furrowed with concern. Marcus, watching the exchange, chimed in. These men need to learn some respect, he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. Henry has done more for this town and its people than most know. The mayor nodded in agreement, a reflective look crossing his face. He's right. You know, he said, addressing the small crowd of onlookers that had gathered. Henry has been a pillar of this community for decades. He funded my education when I had nothing, supported my campaign when I ran for office. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here. The diner fell silent, the weight of the mayor's words settling over everyone. It was a moment of revelation for many who perhaps didn't fully realize the extent of Henry's quiet generosity. Henry shifted slightly in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but too gracious to dismiss it. Marcus leaned back, a soft smile on his face. And he's not just helped the politicians, he continued, looking around the room. Henry saved my life during the war. He pulled me out of a hellhole and lost his leg doing it. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him. The collective gasp from the crowd was almost audible. It was one thing to know Henry as a kind old man who frequented the diner. It was another to realize he was a war hero and benefactor. The room was filled with murmurs of admiration and respect. The atmosphere in the diner shifted from tense to reverent. The rogue bikers, who had been the source of chaos, now stood awkwardly at the back, their earlier defiance completely gone. The mayor turned his attention to them, his expression stern. "You will be held accountable for your actions," he stated firmly. "I've spoken with the chief of police. You'll be taken into custody and will face the consequences of your actions." The bikers exchanged nervous glances, realizing the gravity of their situation. The mayor continued, "Furthermore, you are forbidden from coming within 100 yards of Mr. Henry or this diner. Any violation of this will be met with severe consequences." As the police arrived to take the bikers into custody, Marcus stood up and addressed them one last time. "You're out of the gang," he declared, his voice cold. "You've disrespected the values we stand for, and more importantly, you've disrespected Henry. You're banned permanently. And believe me, you don't want to know what happens if you cross that line again." The weight of Marcus's words was not lost on the bikers. They nodded solemnly, fully understanding the seriousness of the situation. As they were led out by the police, the tension in the room finally began to dissipate. The mayor turned back to Henry, his expression softening. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said quietly, "but it needed to be done." Henry nodded, a look of understanding in his eyes. "They needed a lesson," he agreed, though there was a hint of sadness in his voice. It was clear that Henry didn't relish the idea of punishing the young men, but he knew it was necessary. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the diner returned to normal. The community members who had witnessed the events began to leave, but not before expressing their admiration for Henry. It was a humbling experience for him, one that reminded him of the deep connections he had with the people around him. Marcus stayed behind, sharing a quiet moment with Henry. They reminisced about the past, laughing about old times and sharing stories of their youth. It was a stark contrast to the earlier chaos, a testament to the enduring bonds of friendship and respect. As they talked, the waitress brought a plate of food for Marcus. He thanked her and nodded toward Henry. "You're a good man, Henry," he said, his voice sincere. "This town owes you more than they know." Henry smiled, a gentle, tired smile. "I just did what I could," he replied humbly. "That's all any of us can do." As the night drew to a close, the diner slowly emptied out, leaving Henry and Marcus in a quiet corner, lost in their conversation. In the days that followed, the community buzzed with conversations about what had happened. People gathered in small groups at the market, the church, and even on street corners, sharing their thoughts and reflections. Many were shocked to learn of the bikers' disrespect and felt a deep sense of shame that such an incident could occur in their town. The revelation of Henry's past sacrifices and the extent of his quiet contributions touched the hearts of many, sparking a collective reflection on the importance of respecting elders and honoring those who had served. Henry, ever humble, resumed his regular visits to the diner. As he walked through the doors, he was greeted warmly by the staff and other patrons. The usual buzz of conversation quieted momentarily, and a wave of appreciation washed over the room. People nodded at him, some with soft smiles, others with respectful nods. The waitress, who had bravely stood up for him, beamed with gratitude as she served him his favorite meal. The atmosphere in the diner had changed. It felt more like a gathering place for a close-knit family than a public eatery. The local newspaper ran a piece highlighting Henry's contributions and the lessons learned from the bikers' mistakes. It served as a powerful reminder that the actions of individuals could ripple through a community, for better or worse. The diner staff, who had always admired Henry's quiet dignity, found new ways to show their appreciation. They offered him complimentary meals and reserved his favorite table, ensuring he always had a place in their establishment. The owner of the diner, an old friend of Henry's, even put up a small plaque near the entrance, honoring Henry as a cherished member of the community. It read, "In recognition of a life of service and generosity, We honor our friend and neighbor, Henry. Henry continued his daily routines, unchanged by the attention and accolades. To him, the true reward was seeing the community come together, reflecting the values he held dear. He appreciated the kind words and gestures, but what mattered most was the strengthened bond among the townspeople. It reminded him of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of kindness. As he sat in his favorite corner of the diner, sipping his coffee, Henry couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. His life had been marked by service and sacrifice, but it was moments like these, when the community rallied together in the face of adversity, that made it all worthwhile. The incident had been a catalyst for change, a lesson in respect and gratitude that would resonate for years to come. The aftermath of the diner incident saw the rogue bikers facing the consequences of their actions. They were taken into custody and soon after stood trial for their behavior. The court proceedings were swift, and the verdict came as no surprise. They were found guilty of harassment and disorderly conduct. The sentencing, however, took an unexpected turn, thanks to Henry's intervention. Despite the gravity of their actions, Henry couldn't shake the belief that everyone deserved a second chance. He petitioned the court for leniency, requesting a reduction in their sentences. His condition was simple. He wanted to meet with them before they served their time. The judge, moved by Henry's compassion and the respect he commanded in the community, agreed to his request. The meeting took place in a small room at the courthouse. The atmosphere was tense as the bikers, heads bowed in shame, entered the room. Henry sat at the table, his expression calm and inviting. As they settled in, he began to speak, sharing the story of his life, his days in the military, the hardships he faced, and his efforts to build a better community. He spoke of the importance of compassion, understanding, and forgiveness. Henry looked directly at Chuck, the leader of the group, and said, "We all make mistakes, son. It's what we do after that defines us." His voice was gentle but firm, carrying the weight of his years and wisdom. Chuck, visibly moved, began to speak. His voice cracked as he recounted his own story, how he had started as a good kid, but life's challenges and temptations had led him astray. Tears welled up in his eyes as he admitted, "I've done terrible things, acted without thinking. I let anger and frustration control me." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I never thought about the consequences. Until now." The room fell silent, the gravity of the moment sinking in. Henry reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Chuck's shoulder. "It's never too late to change," Henry said, his voice filled with warmth. "But change requires effort and a willingness to make amends." Henry then offered them a path to redemption. He proposed helping them find jobs after their release, on the condition that they actively participate in volunteer work and community service. "You have to earn back the trust you've lost," Henry continued, "and the best way to do that is by giving back to the community you've wronged." The bikers were stunned by his generosity and willingness to help. They had expected punishment, not compassion. One by one, they nodded in agreement, their expressions a mix of relief and determination. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Henry's offer gave them a glimmer of hope, a chance to start over. The courtroom scene became a turning point in their lives. Upon serving their reduced sentences, the bikers returned to the community with a newfound sense of purpose. They threw themselves into volunteer work, helping at local shelters, cleaning up public spaces, and assisting with community events. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed, and slowly they began to rebuild their reputations. The community, initially skeptical, watched as the former troublemakers transformed into responsible and hard-working individuals. Trust was not given freely, but over time, the bikers earned it through their actions. They became a testament to the power of redemption and the belief that people could change if given the opportunity. Months later, the community gathered at the diner for a small celebration. It was a humble affair, but the atmosphere was filled with warmth and gratitude. Henry sat at a table, surrounded by friends and neighbors, his smile as radiant as ever. The bikers, now reformed, were present as well. They had become an integral part of the community, their efforts to make amends appreciated by all. As the evening wore on, Henry stood to speak. His voice, though frail with age, carried a timeless message. Tonight, we celebrate change and forgiveness. Life isn't always easy, but with kindness and understanding, we can overcome even the greatest challenges. He looked around the room, his eyes shining with pride. Thank you all for being here, for believing in second chances. The room erupted in applause, the sound a testament to the community's unity and resilience. As the night ended, the once rogue bikers approached Henry, gratitude evident in their eyes. Chuck, now a changed man, spoke on behalf of the group. Thank you, Henry, for believing in us when we didn't believe in ourselves. You've given us a chance to be better, and we'll always be grateful. Henry smiled, his heart full. Remember, it's never too late to make a difference. Keep doing good, and the world will be a better place for it. The story ended on a hopeful note, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, compassion and forgiveness could lead to beautiful transformations. Henry's legacy of kindness continued to inspire, a beacon of hope for all who knew him. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around to the end of this incredible journey. What a story, right? Henry's tale is a touching reminder of the power of forgiveness and the potential for change. It's amazing how a 91-year-old veteran, with all the wisdom and kindness he's gathered over the years, could still impact others so profoundly. His decision to give the bikers a second chance, even after all they put him through, shows a level of compassion that's truly inspiring. What struck me the most was how Henry never lost faith in humanity, even when faced with disrespect and cruelty. His belief in second chances transformed not just the bikers, but the entire community. It's a powerful message about how even small acts of kindness and understanding can ripple out and create a better world. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What did you find most inspiring? Do you think everyone deserves a second chance? Drop your comments below and let's get a discussion going. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for more stories that inspire and uplift. Until next time, take care and keep spreading kindness.